Today we're gonna do the Sodder children.
Yep.
Caleb,
What is it about, Morgan? Give us an overview. Give us an overview, Morgan.
So in SpongeBob when they go
All right.
and they go to the tough
All
guys
right,
bar
The
and
salty
they're
spittoon.
yeah.
All right. It was the night before Christmas, 1945. The Sodder family was asleep in their home in Fayetteville, West Virginia. Suddenly, around 1:30 a.m., the family awoke to a fire in their house. George and Jenny Sodder, along with 4 of their children, escaped. However, 5 children still remained in the house: Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty. These children shared 2 bedrooms upstairs across the hall from 2 of the Sodder boys who escaped. George Sodder rushed back in, but the staircase was on fire. He ran outside to grab his ladder to climb up to their bedroom window. However, the ladder was missing. He tried to start his coal truck so he could park them next to the house and climb on top of them, but they wouldn't start, even though they had been working the day before.
Coal truck?
Yeah, like you haul coal with it.
Oh.
So a truck filled with coal, and he wanted to park it next to a fire.
Oh, it's literally just like a truck bed with coal in it.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's fucking stupid.
Marion ran to a neighbor's house to call the local fire department, but they couldn't get any response. Another neighbor who saw the fire also tried to contact the fire department without any response. This neighbor would drive into town to track down the fire chief, F.J. Morris, who contacted his crew. But even though the fire department was 2.5 miles away, they didn't arrive until nearly 7 hours later at 8 a.m. By that time, the house was reduced to a smoking pile of ash. So the fire department was only 2.5 miles away.
And it took 7 hours?
Yeah.
What do you think? What, he just didn't like his kids, so he's like, I'm just gonna kill them and set the house on fire?
I'm not saying. No, that's not the theory. A search of the grounds found no human remains. Morris suggested that the fire had completely cremated the children's bones. While this seems plausible, it isn't completely true. When in a fire, soft tissues are burned away, but bones usually become brittle and break into large fragments, and even this takes a while to happen. Eyewitnesses say that the Sodder house only burned for 45 minutes before collapsing. A state inspector attributed the fire to faulty wiring, and George Sodder used a bulldozer to cover the basement with 5 feet of dirt as a memorial to the children he lost. Let's quickly get into some background on George Sodder. George was born in Tula, Italy in 1895. When he was 13, he immigrated to the United States, where he started his own trucking company. He and his wife Jenny lived in Fayetteville, West Virginia, a small town with a small but active Italian immigrant community. The Sodders were respected in the community, but George held strong opinions, much of which included politics and his hatred for Italian dictator Benito Mussolini, which sometimes caused him to get into some arguments with other locals. George also never spoke about why he left Italy.
Who likes dictators?
Apparently, the other people in this town did.
Well, that's ridiculous. Anyways,
that's what George Sodder thought, but they wanted to argue with him.
Well, good. I fucking like George.
Apparently, they did too, even though they just said he held strong opinions.
Yeah, well, Italians can be annoying. I don't like Italians.
The Sodders began to question if their children were still alive because of some strange occurrences leading up to the fire. A few months before the fire, a man came to the house asking George about hauling work. He then wandered to the back of the house and pointed to 2 fuse boxes, claiming that they were going to start a fire someday. But George recently had them checked by the power company, who deemed them to be in good condition. Not too soon after this, a life salesman came to the house, and when George declined his offer, the salesman became furious and said, quote, "Your goddamn house is going up in smoke, and your children are going to be destroyed. You are going to be paid for the dirty remarks you've been making about Mussolini." Just before Christmas Day, the older Sodder sons recalled a man parked along Highway 21, watching the younger Sodder children come home from school. On the night of the fire, at around 12:30 a.m., the phone rang, and Jenny answered it, hearing an unfamiliar female voice asking for an unfamiliar name, with laughter in the background and glasses clinking. Jenny hung up. She noticed that the front door was unlocked and noticed Marion was sleeping on the couch, thinking the other kids were upstairs. She also noticed that the lights were on inside. When she got back in bed, she heard a loud bang on the roof, then heard a rolling noise. About an hour later is when the fire started. A key observation is the lights being on. If the fire was caused by faulty wiring, then there would be no power to the house. Witnesses also said that the lights were on while the fire was occurring. Jenny, refusing to believe that the fire completely melted 5 of her children's bones, conducted her own experiments by burning various animal bones, which always left a burned pile of bones. She contacted a crematorium, which informed her that bodies that are burned at 2,000 degrees for 2 hours leave bones, and if you recall, the Sodder house burned for 45 minutes.
Dude, what do you think so you're saying that someone kidnapped the kids?
That's what we're implying, Morgan.
So who did it?
That's the question. Who did it? There were also various household appliances that had survived the fire and were found in the ruins. A telephone repairman would inform the Sodders that their phone lines had been cut, not burned. A witness also came forward to say that he saw a man at the house using a block and tackle for removing car engines, which may explain why George's trucks didn't start. But this man named Lenny Johnson was arrested for stealing the block and tackle, but denied being involved in the fire. Also, there is nothing suggesting that the engines were removed. One day, while the family was visiting the ruins, Sylvia Sodder found a hard rubber object on the ground, and Jenny theorized that this is what she heard rolling on the roof the night of the fire. Upon inspection, George Sodder determined it was a napalm pineapple bomb, such as the ones used in the war at the time. Strange that there's a...
Is it what SpongeBob lived in?
It kind of looks like it. After the fire, many people came forward with reported sightings of the children. A woman claimed to see the children in a car that passed by during the time of the fire. A woman operating a tourist stop around 50 miles west of the Sodder house said that she saw the children the morning after the fire. She told police, quote, "I served them breakfast. There was a car with Florida license plates at the tourist court too." A woman at a Charleston hotel claimed to see 4 of the 5 children. Quote, "The children were accompanied by 2 men and 2 women, all of Italian extraction. I tried to talk to the children in a friendly manner, but the men appeared hostile and refused to allow me to talk to these children. I sensed that I was being frozen out, and so I said nothing more. They left early the next morning." In 1947, George and Jenny contacted the FBI in hopes that they would help. They replied saying they would if the local authorities agreed. Strangely, the Fayetteville Police and Fire Department refused. The Sodders hired a private investigator named C.C. Tinsley. Tinsley discovered that the same salesman who threatened George Sodder was on the coroner's jury that determined the fire was accidental. Tinsley also heard a rumor from the town's minister that the fire chief had found a heart in the ruins and hid it in a dynamite box that he buried at the scene. Tinsley persuaded Morris to show him the box, and after they dug it up, they took it to the funeral director, who determined that the heart was actually beef liver that had never been in the fire. In 1949, the Sodders hired somebody to excavate the rubble and thoroughly search through it. Several small objects were found, including 4 shards of human vertebrae. The bones were taken to the Smithsonian Institution, who analyzed them. In their report, they said, quote, "Since the transverse recesses are fused, the age of this individual at death should have been 16 or 17 years. On this basis, the bones show greater skeletal maturation than one would expect for a 14-year-old boy. It is, however, possible, although not probable, for a boy 14 and a half years old to show 16 to 17 maturation," end quote. They also said that the bones had not been exposed to a fire. Quote, "One would expect to find the full skeletons of the 5 children rather than only 4 vertebrae." They concluded that the vertebrae most likely came from the dirt that George had used in the memorial.
Where'd he get the dirt from?
I don't know. That's the thing. It's just, where the hell did these vertebrae come from? Nobody seems to talk about it either.
Oh,
They just found
that's really weird.
4 pieces of vertebrae
Human
from
vertebrae.
from dirt that this Italian man used, and they just said it ain't the kids.
Is this a real story?
Yes.
Where'd you pull this? Is this like some 4chan shit?
Doesn't this sound like a comedy kind of thing? The report prompted 2 court hearings in Charleston, where the governor told the Sodders that their case was, quote, hopeless, declaring that the case was closed. George and Jenny created a billboard along Route 16 which offered a $5,000 reward to anyone with information about their missing children. This prompted multiple people to call in about tips, and George would investigate all of them, all of which led to nothing. And for the rest of his life, George Sodder would look into many tips, one of which included him seeing a newspaper photo of school children in New York City, which looked like his daughter Betty. He then drove to Manhattan and tracked down the child's parents, but they refused to speak with him. In 1968, 23 years after the fire, Jenny received a letter addressed to her. The letter was postmarked from Kentucky, and inside was a photo of a man in his mid-20s. On the back was writing that said, quote, Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie, little boys, A90132 or 35. George and Jenny agreed that the man looked like their son Louis Sodder, who would have been 32 by that time. They both had similar features: straight, strong nose, dark curly hair, dark eyes, and upward tilt of the left eyebrow. Nobody knows what the numbers mean, but many have pointed to them being the zip code for Sicily, Italy. To them being the zip code for Sicily, Italy. Am I saying that right? Sicily.
I don't fucking know.
I don't know. You live in Italy. I would just assume.
I don't. That doesn't mean I speak Italian.
Sicily, Italy.
Sicily?
Sicily, Italy.
You couldn't pronounce Sicily? Are you fucking kidding?
Fuck you.
Oh, dude, don't cut that out.
I hate
Don't-
you. I hate you.
Do not cut that out. If you post a video without this in, I'm flagging it and reporting it.
Italy introduced zip codes in 1967, a year before the letter was received. This could be a clue as to where Louis was living. However, this is all speculation. The Sodders hired a private detective to go to Kentucky, where the letter was postmarked, but the Sodders never heard from him again. Sadly, George Sodder died a year later in 1969, never truly knowing what happened to his children. After the fire, Jenny only wore black as a sign of mourning. She lived the rest of her life hiding away from society and passed away in 1989. Sylvia Sodder, who was 2 at the time of the fire, was the longest living Sodder child. She passed away in 2021 at the age of 79, never believing her siblings perished in the fire.
Dude, they both have like black hair, but
But to be fair,
you could,
there's probably
yeah,
a lot
but
of people that look similar to him.
yeah, I was gonna say you could have 20 dudes, lined up and they'd all look similar.
I don't know, because I don't know. I kind of believe it's him. Just because of how weird the letter is, you know. I feel like if it was somebody pulling a prank, they'd say something else. With all that, let's get into the theories, of which there are only 2. Our first theory is that the children died in the fire. With the house only burning for 45 minutes before collapsing, it seems unlikely that the bones had been completely cremated. However, after the house collapsed, everything underneath would be trapped in smoldering ashes, which would act as an oven. With the remains smoldering until the fire department arrived 7 hours later, it's possible they completely burned away. However, there are many problems with this theory. When the fire first started, there was no communication by any of the 5 children, who probably would have been screaming. It is possible that they had passed out from smoke inhalation. However, it's highly unlikely that all 5 of them would have passed out that quickly. Also, the 2 surviving Sodder boys, who were just across the hall, had made it out with only some singed hair. As mentioned earlier, many appliances had survived the fire and were found in the ruins, meaning that not everything had burned. There was also no smell of burning flesh, which would provide a very strong, powerful, sickening odor that would have filled the air, especially with 5 bodies being burned.
Let me think. We've solved so many cases. I know we can break this one.
I know somebody who can help us break this one.
Who, Jeremy?
No.
Who? The case breaker.
The old case breakers. Get them on the case.
You want to call them up? We should
Yeah.
We should email them and see if we can make like a Zoom call meeting.
Of an interview with them.
Yeah. Can
How's
we
it-
interview the case breakers
How does
and
it
just
feel
have
that
all
you guys
the
are fucking idiots?
all the questions should be super passive aggressive.
Yeah. How does it feel to be working for a bunch of idiots, including yourself?
How does it feel to have the lamest fucking press conference in the history of the U.S.?
The second theory is that the children were kidnapped. Many theorize that the mob kidnapped the children due to George's past in Italy. In this scenario, they had paid off some of the local authorities, which would explain their lack of help. While kidnapping 5 children would be difficult, George and Jenny had gone to bed at 10:30 that night and allowed their kids to stay up late, with the exception that they feed the cows and check the chickens. Perhaps the children had been taken while they were outside, and when the other children went looking for them, they also were taken. The ages of the missing children were 14, 12, 10, 8, and 5, which would make them easier targets. But honestly, it could have been, somebody else, like another group or something. I don't know who, but somebody definitely kidnapped these children.
This is true. Maybe, who knows? Or it could be a freak accident. They died in the fire, smoldering.